The dog refused to leave the grave, and when it finally moved, it began to dig. Red hollow. Cemetery sat in a fog that didn't lift even at noon. A stretch of worn granite and bent flags. It was the kind of place people visited once a year out of obligation, not memory. But she came every week. Martha Walker knelt before her son's headstone, pressing a trembling hand to the cold stone. David Walker, 1988-2023, died in service. No details, no clarity, just the official lie. Behind her, Shadow David's former K-9 partner lay coiled like a sentinel carved in bone. The Belgian Malinois hadn't barked in months, not since the funeral, not since they lowered the closed casket into the soil and told her he'd died of heart failure during a training exercise. Today, though, something had shifted. The dog's body was taut, eyes fixed on the grave as if it were breathing. Martha whispered a prayer. Shadow growled. It started with a single scrape, then another. The dog began clawing at the earth. At first, Martha thought it was grief, then panic, then purpose. Shadow. Her voice cracked. The dog didn't stop. Tom Keller hadn't worn his badge in 4 years, since the deployment, since Afghanistan, since he walked into a trailer park bar and never walked back into uniform. He read about David's death in a single-line email from an old contact at Fort Halberd. Lanot Walker, heart failure. Off the record, suspicious, then silence. But Tom knew the code. The military had a way of burying the wrong truths with the right metals, so when his phone rang that morning with Martha Walker's number flashing across the screen, he answered on the first ring. "There's something wrong with the grave," she said. By the time Tom arrived, a crowd had gathered. The cemetery groundskeeper stood at a cautious distance. A couple of nearby mourners whispered, eyes darting between Shadow and the disturbed mound of soil. The dog was still digging, claws caked in wet dirt, a low, guttural growl vibrating in its chest. A smear of blood marked one paw. He had dug until skin split. "What the hell?" Tom muttered, stepping closer. Martha turned to him, eyes raw. "He started this morning." "Hasn't stopped." Tom knelt, rested a hand gently on Shadow's back. The dog didn't flinch. Instead, it pressed its snout to the grave and let out a sharp, hollow bark that cracked the air in two. Tom stood. "We need that grave opened." It took more arguing than he expected. The town sheriff didn't want the scandal. The VA rep cited protocols. But Tom still had a name, and more importantly, he had the right threats. When he mentioned a whistleblower memo, eyes shifted. When he suggested contacting a congressman, phones started ringing. 6 hours later, a backhoe carved the earth open under overcast skies. Martha stood frozen beside Tom, hands clenched around a rosary she hadn't touched in years. Shadow watched tail still ears alert. The coffin emerged from the ground like a lie reborn. Dirt washed off in heavy clumps. The casket was standard issue, black-sealed military grade. Tom stepped forward as the latches were loosened. The hinges creaked. The lid opened. Empty. Not a body. Not a uniform. Just a folded flag and a sealed envelope addressed to the Walker family. No seal, no signature, no fingerprints. Shadow barked again, once sharp, then turned his head to the line of trees just beyond the cemetery's back fence. The woods. Tom had always trusted dogs more than men. He followed Shadow through the dying grass across the tree line, past forgotten barbed wire. The woods behind the cemetery weren't vast, but they were old, quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful. Shadow moved like a ghost through the brush, nose low tail, stiff. At one point he stopped, turned his head toward a patch of disturbed ground behind a collapsed shed. Tom walked closer. Something had been dug here. Recently, he knelt. The soil was loose. His fingers sank in. "What are you looking for, boy?" he asked quietly. Shadow whimpered, and then Tom saw it just beneath the roots. A corner of blue fabric frayed military issue he pulled. The cloth came free with a soft tearing sound, wet with soil. On the sleeve a name patch. Walker, but no body. Not yet. Shadow stepped forward, sniffed the spot again, then took off deeper into the woods. Tom didn't follow. Not yet. He turned back toward the cemetery, toward the crowd, the press that had arrived late. The sheriff looking pale, and the VA rep already dialing someone with too much power. The grave was still open. The lie was exposed. But the story was only beginning. That night, Martha didn't sleep. Neither did Tom. He sat in his truck outside the Walker house, listening to the same recording over and over again. David's last call. It was just 47 seconds long, pulled from an encrypted backup David had sent to a private server the day before his death. The words were muffled. Frantic. "If anything happens, it's not natural causes Reed is involved. They're hiding something at a halberd. Tell Tom," then static. The name made Tom's stomach twist. Colonel Marcus Reed. Former operations lead at Halberd. Too clean, too polite, too invisible. Reed had testified at David's funeral, called him a hero. Tom closed the file. Across the street, a light flicked on in Martha's window. Then, just before dawn, Shadow began to howl. The breath was so faint it could have been the wind. But dogs don't mistake wind for life. The forest behind Red Hollow Cemetery never welcomed visitors. Its trees leaned like eavesdroppers. Its ground stayed soft too long after rain, and now kneeling beside a patch of disturbed soil, Tom Keller was watching a dog lose its mind. Shadow snarled, barked, then whimpered his paws, clawing wildly at a shallow dip in the earth. Just an hour ago they had exhumed a casket with no body. Now the dog was telling them where it had gone. Tom dropped to his knees beside the frantic animal. The earth was freshly turned. Too freshly. He pushed Shadow gently aside and began digging with his hands. The scent of copper hit first, then fabric, then something worse. Warmth. His hand struck a shoulder, and that shoulder moved. The body was curled in on itself, face down in the dirt, covered in a military-issued jacket soaked through with blood vomit and soil. The air smelled like a dying winter. Tom rolled the man over, slowly expecting a corpse. But David Walker opened his eyes. They were pale with shock, blank as water. Dirt lined the whites. His lips moved, forming a name that didn't escape. Then he seized. Shadow pressed against his side, low growl, turning into something almost like a cry. Tom lifted the lieutenant out of the shallow grave. He weighed nothing. By the time the sirens reached the road, Walker had gone unconscious again. Lena Marlowe had spent the last 3 nights in her apartment in DCIs locked on classified case files with redacted lines like open wounds. She didn't sleep much since David died. Now she didn't sleep at all. The call came just after midnight. It wasn't a voice she knew, but the message was clear. He's alive. She arrived in Red Hollow 6 hours later. Hair unbrushed, makeup untouched, lab coat still in the back seat. Lena had seen bodies resurrected before, on tables in morgues and data fragments from battlefield autopsies, but she'd never seen someone clawed out of the earth by his own dog. She found Tom waiting outside the clinic. The sky was the same washed-out gray it had been the day of the funeral. "Where is he?" she asked. "Inside stable." "Sort of." He led her down a quiet hallway where Shadow waited outside a door. Body still and eyes unblinking. He hadn't moved since the lieutenant was brought in. Tom pushed the door open. Walker was awake, but only technically. David didn't speak at first. He stared, blinking like light hurt. His skin was an unnatural yellow-gray. Dirt clung to his eyelashes. When Lena touched his arm, he flinched hard and whispered something she barely heard. "Don't let them know I'm awake." She froze. Who, she asked quietly. He looked at her, and for one moment he was her David again. Sharp eyes, iron jaw, that tiny scar near the temple from a bar fight in Fayetteville. Then it slipped. His eyes flicked to the corner of the room. Tom followed the glance. There was nothing there. "I think they drugged me," Walker muttered. "Who?" Lena asked again. "I don't know. I think it was Reed." The name cracked the silence open. Tom stepped forward. "You said that name on your last message." David nodded slowly, as if each motion was too much weight. "Reed. He was there when I passed out, or thought I passed out. There was a needle, and then darkness. Cold." He winced, touched his neck. Lena stepped in, examining the bruising. 2 puncture wounds. Fresh precise. "That's an IV site," she said, voice clinical, but something in her chest twisted. David's voice was hoarse. "I heard them talking. After they thought I was gone. He knows too much." That's what one of them said, and then someone laughed. By morning, David was unconscious again. Lena stayed beside him while Tom met with the local sheriff. The town was already buzzing. The media had caught scent of something. Whispers of a military scandal. A buried man, a barking dog. By noon, the Army's official press office issued a brief statement. "Walker's survival is an active investigation. We are cooperating fully with local authorities." Tom knew the sound of a lie wrapped in protocol. He'd written those statements himself once. Back at the clinic, Lena was flipping through David's medical file. Something wasn't right. The supposed heart failure diagnosis wasn't signed by any field medic. In fact, there were no records at all from the mission he was supposedly on, just a discharge form, typed in a different font from the Army standard. She checked again. Where was he deployed, she asked Tom. Somewhere classified. But now I'm wondering if he was ever deployed at all. Lena stood. "We need to find out what mission he was on." Tom nodded. "I know someone who might still have access to Halberd's black file registry." Later that evening, Lena sat outside the clinic beside Shadow. The dog didn't rest. He stared through the darkness like it owed him something. A reckoning, maybe. She reached out, touched the dog's neck gently. "You knew," she whispered. "You always knew." Shadow leaned against her, and for a moment she allowed herself to cry. Not because David was alive, but because she knew what came next. That night, David dreamed in colorless flashes. A hallway, steel floors. Someone laughing, a woman crying, his own breath slowing, then that sharp sting in his neck. He woke up gasping. Lena was beside him instantly. "It's okay, you're safe." His eyes flicked around the room. "No cameras. No, just me. I need to tell you something." Lena leaned in. He whispered, "They weren't going to bury me here. They had somewhere else." But Shadow followed. He kept showing up. His breathing stuttered. "They moved me, rushed, didn't check the dose. That's why I woke up." He looked at her eyes wide, like he'd just understood something new and terrible. They didn't bury a dead man. They buried a witness. Outside the room, Tom Keller was already dialing the number of the only man he trusted, still working in Army intelligence. 3 rings, then a voice. "Yeah?" Tom's voice was flat. "We've got a situation. It's Reed. He's killing soldiers." There was a pause. Then the line went dead. The first thing David Walker remembered was the smell of bleach. Not dirt, not blood, not fear. Bleach. He was still in uniform when the needle slipped into his neck, clean fast. Practiced. A gloved hand pressed down on his chest. "Shh," someone whispered. It's easier this way." He remembered choking, trying to speak. Then nothing. "Who gave the order?" Tom asked. Walker didn't answer at first. His voice had been buried just as deep as his body. They didn't use names, just ranks. "I remember a patch. One of them had the halberd insignia, but altered black. Not blue, I think. I think they were contractors." Lena stood silently by the window of the hospital room, watching a sedan idle across the street for the second time in an hour. "How did you find out about the arms ring?" Tom asked David. Closed his eyes. "I didn't mean to. I was trying to trace a missing shipment infrared scopes that never made it to cable. Found them rerouted to a storage unit registered under a fake foundation. Veterans for Valor. But inside crates of weapons, U.S.-grade serial numbers filed off. Same week I get called in by Reed." He smiled the whole time. Tom nodded grimly. "And the next morning you were declared dead. They didn't want me dead." David said, "They wanted me forgotten." That night, 2 men in black suits entered the hospital lobby. They didn't ask for a room number. They didn't sign in. They walked straight to the elevator, one pressing a Bluetooth earpiece, the other holding a file folder, too clean to be real. Lena saw them first through the observation glass. She turned Tom. He looked up from David's bedside. He saw her face, then he moved. "Get him out," Tom said. "Now." Lena blinked. "Where I don't care." "Anywhere but here." He crossed the hallway to intercept the suits. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The taller one flashed an ID. No badge, no agency, just a name and a number. "We're here to escort Lit Walker for federal debrief." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Funny, I didn't get that memo. Need-to-know basis." "Guess I don't need to know," Tom said, stepping in front of the door. "Which means neither do you." The other man's hand drifted to his jacket. Tom's did too. The silence cracked like ice. Inside, Lena was already wheeling David out through the service corridor. Shadow trotting beside them, silent alert, as if he'd been waiting for this moment all along. They vanished into the night with no headlights. The back roads out of Red Hollow offered enough darkness to fold into. Tom met them, 2 hours later, at an abandoned ranger station just inside the forest line. He came alone except for a duffel bag full of burner phones and old IDs. David slept on a cot beneath a mylar blanket. Shadow lay curled at his feet. Lena stood over both of them, arms folded. Tom tossed her the first phone. No SIMs. 1 call each. She caught it. They know he nodded. They're not here to investigate, they're here to erase. By morning, the news had changed. Now, David Walker's miraculous survival was being retracted. A government spokesperson claimed the body found was likely a misidentified civilian. No apology, no correction, just erasure. Lena returned to the gravesite alone. The forest was quieter than before, like something had been removed from it. She walked the edge of the disturbed dirt, kneeling where Shadow had clawed a forensic kit hung from her shoulder. She brushed the soil carefully, eyes searching for anomalies. Then she saw it, a thin thread of fabric snagged in a root. Black synthetic. Not standard issue. She swabbed it and sealed it. Then she found the blood. Not David's, different protein structure. She ran the quick test on site an older model, but good enough AB negative rare. She checked the file again. Only one person on Reed's private detail had that type. Name, Bryce Carver, ex-Special Forces, discharged dishonorably. Now, private security for Halberd's off-book ops. Lena stood and snapped a photo, evidence proof. That night, back at the ranger station, David was feverish. Lena checked the wound again. Nothing fatal, but the cold, the shock, the drugs. It was catching up. He grabbed her hand suddenly. "They don't stop, Lena." "I know," she whispered. He coughed once, then spoke so softly it barely counted as speech. There was something else in the shipment. Not weapons. Not at first. What he looked at, Tom Data drives names. People in D.C. high up. Reed wasn't just moving guns. He was building a ledger. Lena felt the chill in her throat. What kind of names? David hesitated. Senators, a Supreme Court clerk, CEOs, all funneled through shell companies, off-book deals disguised as veteran charities. If this comes out, it doesn't just end. Reed. Tom exhaled slowly. That's why they buried you alive. Later, when Lena stepped outside for air, she saw something she didn't like. A fresh footprint in the mud. Too fresh. Not theirs. She looked up. The trees whispered nothing back. Inside, Tom was already loading his weapon. Time to move again, he said. Lena didn't argue. Shadow had already stood, tail stiff body trembling, not in fear but anticipation. Like he knew what came next. Back in the hospital, the two men in suits reviewed the surveillance footage. They watched Lena wheel the lieutenant out, watched Shadow follow. The taller man closed the file. We missed the window. The other one didn't answer, but he pulled out his phone and dialed a number with no contact name. Code Delta full sweep and send a team to the mother. He hung up, then looked at the camera. Loose ends. Don't stay loose for long. The bug was hidden behind the dashboard, smaller than a coin. Shadow found it before the engine even started. He barked once, sharp and fast, then began pawing at the passenger side panel like something inside was alive. Lena pulled the car over, popped the glove box and froze. A black sliver of plastic. No markings, no wires. Just a pulse of red light blinking once every 6 seconds. Keller ripped it out without a word and tossed it into the river 2 miles down. They didn't say anything after that. Some silences are warnings. They called it Project Vulture. The name meant nothing at first, just another classified archive buried inside a partitioned drive pulled from a seized Halberd laptop. Lena had cracked through it with tools she wasn't supposed to still have access to forensic decryption keys. A brute force algorithm disguised as a spreadsheet, and the patience of someone who'd lost too much. The deeper she went, the colder it got. Shipment logs marked with phantom destinations. Kandahar, Stuttgart, Djibouti, but every final delivery ended in black blocks of text. Rewritten, replaced Reed's signature, wasn't on any of them, but his men were everywhere. Private contractors, non-military clearances. A rotating shell of names, most fake, a few very real. And at the center of it, a funding channel that bled through. DC nonprofits, defense budgets, and one political super PAC. Lena printed out the key documents. There were only 5 pages, but together they formed a map of something she couldn't yet define, a pipeline built not just to move weapons but to keep them untraceable, unclaimed, invisible ghost guns routed through ghost towns paid for by ghost donors. Tom reviewed the files in a borrowed cabin with blackout curtains and no cell reception. The smell of old wood and mildew filled the corners. A fire hissed quietly behind them, low and careful. David Walker sat silent in the far chair, half asleep, wrapped in layers. His pulse had stabilized, but he still hadn't spoken much since the escape. He stared at the flames like they were telling a story. Only he could hear. Tom finished the last page, leaned back and sighed. This is a war machine. Lena looked at him. Built to fund one, she asked. He shook his head. Built to survive one. Shadow paced the room, his paws silent against the wooden floor. Every few minutes he would stop by the door, sniff once and sit, then rise again. Is he okay? Lena asked quietly. Tom didn't answer. Shadow wasn't waiting for someone to arrive. He was warning them something already had. Later that night, Lena woke to the sound of static. It wasn't the fire, not the wind, it was the laptop. The old one, air-gapped and clean, the one she only used offline. Its screen flickered once, then went black. A message flashed in a white terminal window before it disappeared. "You're in the files. They know." She yanked the power cord and slammed the lid shut. The room fell dark again, but the silence wasn't the same. By morning, Keller had burned every printed file. He memorized them first. So did Lena. David watched with a look that hovered between grief and guilt. "These people," he said quietly, "they don't care if it's a war zone or a church. If it bleeds, they'll sell to it." He reached into his jacket and pulled out something wrapped in a crumpled napkin. A USB drive bent slightly at the tip. "I pulled this the night before they buried me," he said. "It's from Reed's own locker." Tom looked at him. "Why didn't you say anything before?" David didn't blink. "Because I wasn't sure if I'd live long enough for it to matter." The USB was old. The encryption wasn't. Lena spent 5 hours in silence. She decrypted it in 4. It contained one video file, no metadata, no timestamp. A single clip, grainy handheld night vision green. A group of men offloading crates from a military truck. No uniforms, no tags. One man standing off to the side wearing a scarf and suit jacket. His face was turned away until the end when he stepped into the light. Colonel Marcus Reed. Voice. Clear. "All right. Next shipment's Berlin. Keep the rifles covered and no damn photos. We're ghosts. Understand." The camera shook, then black. They didn't speak for a long time after the clip ended. Tom lit a cigarette and didn't smoke it. David stared at the blank screen. Lena's voice was the first to break. "If we leak this, we're dead." Tom nodded. "If we don't, someone else will be." They ditched the car that evening. Shadow refused to get into the new one until Keller scanned it. Top to bottom, removed a tiny device embedded under the back wheel. Well, it wasn't broadcasting. Not yet a dead tracker waiting for a signal. Tom smashed it with the butt of his pistol and left it in a ditch. They went dark. No phones, no laptops, no credit cards, only burner maps, printed routes, and silent understanding. The roads ahead were empty, but the war was already in motion. Back in Red Hollow, a black SUV sat parked at the edge of the cemetery. Inside, a man in a tan overcoat scrolled through a list of outgoing signals. Most were noise, but one file had pinged a known node in Stuttgart before it went dead. The man tapped the screen, then spoke softly into a headset. "They have the Vulture file." Pause. "Yes." "That one." Pause again. "Send in Ashwood." He hung up, then looked out the window. A crow landed on the fence nearby, watching. In the forest near the cabin, Shadow stood still, ears raised. Something had changed in the wind. Something was coming. Not fast, not loud, but sure. Some nights, Shadow slept with his body curled against the door. Other nights, he didn't sleep at all. The forest air. Outside the safe house was cold, silent, and deep. But inside, David Walker was at war again, and not in memory. In breath. He thrashed once, then stilled. Eyes open, not blinking. Lena stood by with a syringe, but didn't use it. She'd learned that shaking him made things worse. So she waited, hands clenched, heart pinned behind her ribs, until his pulse settled and his eyes remembered the room. David sat up, slowly, slick with sweat, jaw clenched. "You were dreaming," she whispered. He looked past her, straight at Shadow, who hadn't moved from his place at the door. It wasn't a dream, he said. They'd changed safe houses again, moved higher into the ridge to a forgotten ranger station surrounded by ash trees and silence. It had no signal, no power lines, no locks, just a stove, a hatch, and a porch that creaked when the wind blew wrong. Tom checked the perimeter every 4 hours, watching the hills like they'd grow teeth. Lena worked at a table built from broken beams and rusted nails, flipping through copies of military requisitions she'd printed before going dark. Every third entry was fake. Every fourth was traced back to Halberd. Every name had a ghost behind it. Shadow never barked unless it mattered. It mattered on a Tuesday morning at 4:12 a.m. No one was awake, not quite, but David had started shaking again, caught in the grip of a half-scream when the dog stood up and growled low. Not loud, not yet. But warning, Lena blinked awake. Tom reached for his sidearm. Outside, a twig snapped. The growl became a snarl. Tom didn't hesitate, opened the door. Fast and silent. Slipped out with his back to the wall. The moonlight was thin, fractured by branches. Then he saw it, a shadow that wasn't theirs. Movement. Two bodies crouched low. No sound. But then, teeth. Shadow lunged past him in a blur of brown and fury, straight into the clearing. A scream. Then gunfire. It lasted less than 15 seconds. When it ended, one man was dead, neck torn open, and the other gone bleeding into the trees. Tom found a blood trail, but not a destination. Back inside, Shadow stood still as a statue muzzle slick with red. David stared at the floor. I told you, he said they won't stop. 2 days later, they made a choice. Attack first. Lena had traced a shipment, supposedly, parts for cold-weather drones marked for Fort McCarran, Nevada. The delivery logs didn't match reality. It wasn't drones, it wasn't weather gear, it was weapons. Tom made the call. We find the warehouse. They left David behind, too weak to move far, but clear-headed enough to load a rifle and count the rounds. Shadow stayed with him, pacing like a soldier between sentry posts. Tom and Lena took the back roads. They didn't speak until the base came into view just west of a burned-out town with no name and fewer people. The warehouse sat behind chain link, rusted and false. The lock on the gate was plastic. The cameras weren't on inside crates. Dozens, all sealed, all stenciled with military codes that hadn't existed in 10 years. Lena opened the first one. Grenades. The second ammunition, NATO rounds. The third uniforms, all stripped of insignias, blood still staining the collars. Tom said nothing, but his hand shook as he pulled open the fourth crate inside dog tags. At least 100. All real. All U.S. soldiers. All listed as dead. Then Shadow barked loud. Too loud, Tom and Lena turned just in time to see him bolt to the far wall. He stood, frozen nose to the concrete, then clawed hard at the baseboard. Lena followed. Behind the shelf was a metal hatch, unmarked, unlatched. Tom opened it. What lay beneath wasn't a basement, it was a bunker. They climbed down slowly, the smell of oil and old air thickening with every step. The room below was steel-lined, wired, humming faintly with leftover current. Desks, maps, radios, and a single wall plastered with photos, faces, names, ranks, all connected by string arrows, scribbled notations in red ink. At the center of the web, a photo of Colonel Marcus Reed, and beneath it in block letters, the silent legend. Lena scanned the room with trembling fingers, opened a file cabinet tucked into the wall. She pulled document after document, operations, call signs, field reports, and then paused. One name caught her general. Paul Whitlock, National Security Council Defense Oversight, present at David's funeral. She checked another senator, Dana Wexler, chair of the Armed Services Committee, publicly opposed black market arms legislation. Another. They weren't just field agents. They were lawmakers, policymakers, kingmakers. When they returned to the safe house, David was already packing. I'm going with you. Next time, he said, you can't. Lena replied, you're not ready. He looked at her. That's why I have to go. Outside, Shadow sat watching the trees again. Not like a dog, like a soldier. That night, Keller wrote a name in his notebook. The name wasn't new, but now it burned Ashwood. No rank, no file, just a whisper. A fixer, a killer. Reed's ghost. At 3:33 a.m., Lena woke again. David was gone from his cot. The porch was cold. She stepped outside and found him staring into the trees barefoot, hands clenched, face pale in the moonlight. "What is it?" she whispered. His voice was quiet. "They're close." She stepped beside him. "How do you know?" He looked down. Shadow had stood up, tail still ears forward and not barking. Not yet. They called them ghosts. The soldiers who vanished between deployments, whose names quietly disappeared from databases, whose photos never made it home. David Walker had written them down. Not on a laptop, not in the cloud. On paper, folded 5 times, and kept in the sole of an old combat boot. He handed it to Lena without a word. 12 names, all real. All dead, officially. All gone after asking the wrong questions. Keller paced the porch of the new safe house perched on a hillside in northern Montana, wind cold enough to sharpen bone. He'd seen names vanish before. He'd helped disappear some of them back when orders came wrapped in flags and sealed with silence. But this was different. This wasn't war. This was murder. Disguised as loyalty, Lena traced every name in the soldiers' list. One by one, through scrap files, archived reports, shadowed emails with subject lines like training accident or status pending. None of them had graves, only dates and coordinates. 6 of them had been stationed at Fort Vickers. 4 had rotated through Halberd's Northern Command. But all of them, every single one, had signed leave records citing the same destination, a remote cabin outside Ponderay, Idaho, a place that didn't officially exist. They left at night. No GPS, no phones, no headlights for the last 20 miles. Shadow sat in the back seat unmoving. David stared out the window like the trees might whisper something back. The cabin appeared like a bruise on the horizon, low angular and wrong. Not abandoned, just forgotten. Time didn't erase it, it just grew around it. Keller stepped out first. Rifle drawn, the air was still, but heavy. Not dead waiting. Lena followed, scanning the structure. No recent tire tracks, no lights. David walked last. His limp was worse that day. Shadow trotted past them, nose twitching. Then he stopped and barked once. They found the first body an hour later. It was shallow, maybe 6 inches beneath the frozen moss near a collapsed fence post behind the cabin. Shadow scratched gently, then sat back. Lena knelt beside him and brushed away the soil with her gloved hands. What emerged was a boot, then bone, then dog tags. Keller leaned in, voice quiet. Name? Lena read it. J. Fields. David's voice broke behind them. He was a medic. He refused to sign a false report in Syria. Next day, he was gone. Shadow didn't move. He just kept looking at the woods. They uncovered more as daylight faded. 7 sites. 7 shallow graves, each one marked by a detail no one would notice unless they were looking: a snapped branch, a missing stone, a depression in the frost. Each body had tags. Each name matched David's list. Some had been shot, others bound. One was missing a face. Lena tagged every discovery, photographed the site, bagged the samples. In the silence between snaps, she realized her hands had stopped shaking. They weren't uncovering history. They were dragging it, still warm, into the open. It was near dusk when the ground gave way beneath Keller. A hole hidden by brush. No, wider than a manhole, but deeper and wired. Shadow lunged forward too late. The tripwire caught. The explosion didn't sound like Hollywood, it was muffled. Real, the air warped. Keller hit the ground hard, blood streaming from his leg. David yelled. Lena screamed. But Shadow didn't make a sound. He just stood over Keller, growling into the smoke. A second tripwire was waiting, but Shadow's paw pinned it, perfectly still, not moving an inch, not even to breathe. They carried Keller back to the cabin, blood thick between the wood slats of the floor. David tied a tourniquet, Lena stitched the wound. No one spoke for almost an hour. Finally, David opened his mouth. His voice was low. They didn't want these men to disappear. They wanted them to be forgotten. He unfolded a second paper from his jacket. Smaller, cleaner. Just one name. Ashwood. The man who cleaned up what Reed didn't want. Seen the one who planted the traps, the one who buried the soldiers. Later, when Keller finally blinked through the haze of morphine, he whispered something Lena never forgot. Don't let them sanitize this. She didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. The way stories get bleached in the retelling, the way deaths become necessary, the way flags are folded over lies. The DNA tests came back the next day. Smuggled through a friend Lena barely trusted, rushed without explanation. Positive matches, 7 names confirmed, 1 fragment still unclaimed, 1 skull too damaged, 8 dead in Idaho. David sat alone on the steps of the cabin, holding a dog tag in each hand. Shadow lay beside him, ears twitching but eyes closed. The wind picked up. Somewhere beyond the trees a crow called twice. David didn't flinch. They think we'll break, he said softly. Shadow lifted his head. David looked into the trees. They're wrong. The broadcast was supposed to change everything. Lena had rehearsed the words, Tom had secured the channel. David had signed the statement in ink, not because it mattered legally, but because it meant something to him. They hit send just after midnight. The screen went black. Then something else aired instead. Breaking news. The anchor said, voice calm and false. A rogue paramilitary group led by ex-soldiers turned radicals is believed to be responsible for a series of attacks on federal property across 3 states. Authorities have identified the leader as David Walker, presumed dead. He is armed. He is dangerous. Behind her, a photo of David filled the screen. Not from military records, from surveillance. He looked like a ghost, like someone who had never come back. In the cabin, no one spoke. Keller stared at the frozen screen. They got the stream. Lena was already reaching for the hard drive. It doesn't matter. We still have. No, David said. We had 1 shot. Outside the trees whispered something old. And the dog growled. They split up that night. Not to run to spread. Lena took the hard copies to a safe courier in Missoula. Tom moved south toward Salt Lake to trigger the contingency drop. David stayed behind to prepare something else. A confession. Not polished, not legal. Just truth. Shadow didn't let Lena out of his sight. Not when she gassed up with gloves on. Not when she parked near the old print shop. Not even when she checked her burner phone for the final time. The message was short. Courier intercepted. Go dark, and beneath it, they're here. The first shot came through the side window. Glass and blood. Lena hit the floor. Shadow lunged through smoke. One figure down, the other shouted, hold fire. But Shadow didn't. The alley became a war zone. Lena crawled toward the car, pressing her hand against the warmth at her side. It didn't feel like pain, it felt like leaving. She collapsed. Shadow circled her once, whined, then ran. Keller reached the scene 4 minutes later. The street was blocked. The car was burning, but Shadow came from behind a dumpster muzzle, bloody limping, dragging Lena by her coat collar 1 foot at a time. She was alive. Barely. Keller carried her through the back lot and out a service door before sirens filled the sky. The city was no longer theirs. By morning, their faces were everywhere. Wanted posters without evidence. Domestic threats in place of veterans. Reed's plan wasn't subtle. Didn't need to be. Lena's body was cold when she woke, but she was breathing. Shadow lay pressed against her ribs, as if his warmth could fix what bullets tried to take. Back in the cabin, David was recording. No lighting, no script, just a chair, a flag, and a voice. "If you're seeing this," he said, "then the lie won. For now." He paused. "They told us we were protecting the country. But when we saw what they really wanted to sell it piece by piece, they buried us. I'm not here to beg. I'm here to say, I remember every name." He listed them, one by one. 12 names, then Lena's, then Keller's, then Shadow's. They were never enemies of the state. They were the state, the best parts of it. He held up his tags. "I'm not afraid of dying. I've already done it once." Pause. "I'm afraid of silence. That's how evil grows." Keller carried Lena into the second safe house by sunrise. She didn't speak for hours, just lay there pale and wrapped in blankets. Shadow wouldn't leave her side, not even to eat. David finished the recording, loaded it to every dead channel, every buried form, every ex-military contact that still owed him a favor. He knew it wouldn't last. He just needed it to spread. Outside the cabin, wind stirred the leaves. Keller sat cleaning his rifle. Lena's blood still stained his sleeves. Shadow lay on the porch head, resting on his paws, but his eyes never closed. Not anymore. He bled out in the back seat, wrapped in Lena's arms as the sun rose over the country he once saved. Shadow didn't make a sound. Not even at the end. It began with the footage David Walker's face, low-res, weathered, lit only by a single lamp, and resolve. His voice wasn't angry, just clear. He told the world what happened, not just to him but to the others, the buried, the betrayed, the forgotten. Within hours, the video was everywhere. Walker, testimony. Ghost soldiers. They buried the wrong man. The mainstream media tried to spin it. They couldn't. Veterans began reposting it. Families of the missing tagged names. Journalists stopped asking questions and started investigating. For the first time in a decade, the lie cracked. Reed made no statement. He didn't need to, because by the end of the second day, the man had disappeared. His office swept clean. His aides silent. His military record sealed. It was the last quiet thing he did. David didn't want a motorcade. He didn't want police protection. He wanted one thing, to walk the truth in by foot. And he did, even after the ambush, even after the blood, even after Shadow fell. They were just outside Arlington when the SUV behind them lit up, not with headlights but bullets. Keller swerved hard, glass shattering across Lena's back. David grabbed the files, pressing them to his chest like a Bible. And Shadow leapt through the back window as the second round hit. One attacker went down screaming. The second never saw the teeth coming, but Shadow didn't come back. They buried him just inside the woods in a spot Lena marked with 3 stones. And silence. She didn't speak for hours. David placed the dog tags beside the grave. Not Shadow's. His own. "I'm not the one who saved us," he said. They reached D.C. by bus. No weapons, no handlers, no security. David wore his old uniform, the one they tried to bury him in. Lena walked beside him, arm still bandaged, face pale. Keller watched every rooftop with eyes like stone. At noon, the Capitol steps were quiet, not empty but hushed, as if the building itself knew what was coming. David stood at the podium, the manila folder in his hand, shaking, once then still. He didn't speak at first. He let the cameras hum, let the wind lift the corners of the files. "Then you killed my dog." Pause. "You called him a weapon. You said he didn't matter." He looked up, But you heard him, didn't you? The whole world did. He dropped the file on the podium, not thrown, laid like an offering. Now you hear me. The documents spread fast. Field reports, death logs, secret transfers, security footage, internal memos. The same paper Reed once buried now bled across screens, feeds, headlines. They couldn't scrub it, because it wasn't just a leak. It was a reckoning. By nightfall, protesters lined the Capitol lawn. Some held signs. Others held dog collars. Someone brought a flag folded into a triangle with Shadow's name written in black marker across the middle. Reed never resurfaced. Some said he fled to the Balkans. Some said he was already dead, but David didn't care, because the silence was broken, and for the first time in years, the bark had been heard. In the quiet after the storm, Lena and Keller returned to the grave. The trees hadn't moved. The stones still stood. Keller set down a single dog biscuit, untouched, then walked away. Lena stayed. She crouched, touched the earth once, and whispered what she hadn't been able to say. Good boy. The cabin was quiet, deep in the Appalachian shadows. No signal, no patrol, just a man with everything to lose and nowhere left to run. But when they breached the door, Reed didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for his uniform. It wasn't about dignity, it was about optics. Even at the end, he thought presentation could save him, but no amount of medals could cover blood. And there was blood on the floor on the doorframe, on Keller's hands as he crawled to cover. After taking the first round, Reed's mercenaries were amateurs, but bullets still tear the same. Keller didn't scream. He didn't shout warnings. He just smiled once. That small crooked smile Lena had seen 100 times before, every mission that wasn't supposed to exist. And then he pulled the pin. The compound was made of wood. Wood burns. They dragged Reed from the wreckage, coughing ash, face blistered, screaming something about honor and loyalty and being a good soldier. But no one listened, because Keller didn't make it out. And David stopped listening to speeches a long time ago. The trial wasn't televised, but everyone knew it was happening. Whistleblowers came forward, old logs surfaced, leaked memos, disappeared files, a dozen more names. The silence collapsed like a dying lung. And through it all, David Walker sat straight-backed behind the microphone, his testimony as spare and sharp as the dog tags around his neck. "I'm not here to speak for the dead," he said once. They already spoke. No one listened. Shadow died on a Wednesday. Not fast, not easy. Organs failed one by one. Lena held his head in her lap. The vet offered sedation. David shook his head. He never ran from pain. He just needed someone there, and he was there until the breath stopped, until the chest went still, until the tail gave one last twitch, then nothing. The funeral was held at Red Hollow, the same cemetery where it began. This time, the grave wasn't empty. It was draped in a flag. The coffin was small, built from oak and silence. David folded the flag himself, hands trembling only once. Then he whispered something no one heard and stepped back. The plaque didn't mention war, didn't mention who fired first, didn't name the country that buried him. It simply read, "Shadow faithful until the end, to those who spoke when silence was safer." Reed was sentenced life without parole. He stared at David across the courtroom, once that strange flicker of disbelief, as if the war hero he tried to erase had actually outlived him. But David didn't nod, didn't blink. He just turned and walked out. Not as a soldier, not even as a survivor, just as a man who told the truth. Lena found the last photograph on Keller's phone. It was taken the night before the final mission. Shadow curled beside the campfire. Keller looking off into the trees, cigarette between his fingers, that same damn crooked smile. She printed it, framed it, left it in the cabin they never sold. Sometimes she'd drive there just to hear nothing, just to remember what it cost. David retired to Montana. Not because he wanted peace, but because he wanted distance. The kind only mountains give. He never wore the uniform again, but he never burned it either. It hangs in his hallway, pressed silent waiting, and on clear days you can see the stone from the trailhead, the one with no names, no emblems, just words etched deep enough to outlive weather. Truth is not a weapon, but it will always leave a scar. The puppy didn't bark. He just stood there, one paw raised in the frosted air nose, twitching at something he couldn't quite name. Maybe memory, maybe blood. Lena knelt beside the grave, her coat dusted with the soft hush of early snow. The new pup leaned alert. Shadow's eyes in a smaller frame circled once before settling beside her knees. The stone hadn't changed. Shadow faithful until the end, to those who spoke when silence was safer. But beneath it, in the silence between seasons, the world had changed. They called it the Truth Accord, a series of reforms, hearings, purges, old officers fell, younger ones stepped up. But the change didn't come from the top. It came from the cracks where light got in, where people remembered a soldier buried without a body, a dog that wouldn't leave. A war fought in the shadows of justice, and one with nothing but blood tape and truth. And one man who vanished before the medals could find him. The cadets sat straighter when Lena entered. Some knew her story, most didn't. She didn't wear her scars, she didn't have to. The story was in the silence, the way she walked past the flag without flinching, the way her voice stayed calm even when her hands trembled. Today's lesson wasn't in the book. She laid a single photo on the desk. 3 figures in the cold, Keller, Walker, Shadow. They weren't saints, she said. They were just people who didn't back down when it was easier to shut up. Pause, that's your inheritance. She read the letter a week later. It arrived without a return address, postmarked from a town too small to be real. The handwriting was careful, not rushed, not dramatic. Just David Lena. If this finds you, I'm probably in a place with no names. That's okay. I wasn't built for ceremony. I never said thank you. Not properly. You saved my life more than once, and not just the heartbeat part. Tell the next generation it's okay to be afraid. Just don't be silent. And if the pup barks at nothing, listen. He might know something you don't. She folded the letter once, didn't cry, didn't smile, just stared out the window until the sun burned low. Keller's name was etched in a new wall. Now, not a memorial, not quite a monument. A promise, Keller. Thomas James, 1969 to 2024. He pulled us out of the fire and pushed the lie in. No quotes, just fact. They held a small ceremony, read hollow again. Fewer cameras this time. Fewer words David didn't show. But someone left a coin on the stone, a challenge coin from a unit that never officially existed. Lena noticed the pup sniffing the breeze, then staring off toward the trees. She didn't ask questions. Not anymore. She still woke sometimes in sweat hearing boots behind her that weren't there, hearing a bark that belonged to another dog. The nightmares didn't stop, but neither did the morning. And in the quiet that followed, she'd hear the tags clink on the pup's collar. A sound she came to trust. The truth didn't heal the country. It just opened it. Let the rot air out, let the light cut in, let the people remember that silence isn't neutral. It's a side. And now, someone was always listening. On the first spring after the trial, Lena returned to the grave with the pup, full grown. Now still lean, still watching shadows. She knelt again, fingers brushing melted snow off the plaque. And for the first time she whispered the words, "Goodbye." But the wind carried them sideways. Because goodbye wasn't the right word, it was just the next one. As they walked away, the dog paused once, looked back. Not out of grief, not for ghosts, just to listen. And in the wind between trees you could almost hear it. The bark that started a war. The silence that couldn't hold. The echo that still answered. We remember.